أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. I ask Allah's forgiveness for any errors that I might make due to the frailty of being human. It is such a delight, after a little bit of a delay, to have this opportunity to talk about the women's khutbah book. I just want to jump right in, but the format is going to be that Dr. Sadia Sheikh and Dr. Fatimah Seedat will do a little bit of a self-introduction about their journey after I read their bios. And then I will say a little bit about the book. I will rein myself in and keep it little. And I will do some questions myself, but by that time, we will make it possible for people in the gallery to ask questions, keeping in mind that people have different levels of their own personal security that they wish. If you are willing to have both your video on, and we hear your own voice, when we get to the end, I will, when we get to that part, I will invite you to, raise your hand so we don't all speak at once. And I will acknowledge you. If you would like to speak but you don't want your video on and you're okay with your voice, you have that choice. And if you don't want either your video or your voice, you can put questions in the chat and I will be monitoring them, while that part of it is going on. This option is, as I said, to respect different people's locations with regard to their sense of their own integrity. Because after 1 week, exclusive access on my Patreon page, I will be making this public. For our lovely editors and who are also authors in their own right, I will be sending you a copy of the first draft. We do a little bit of edits before we make it public on YouTube. So just in case you don't want to be on YouTube, you are invited to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat, and I will share them on your behalf. So let's start with the bios. Dr. Sadia Sheikh is professor in the study of religions at the University of Cape Town. She specializes in the study of Islam, gender ethics, and feminist theory, with a special interest in Sufism. Her study of Islam began with an abiding interest in existential questions, as well as a commitment to social justice. Much of her work is animated by an interest and curiosity about the relationship between the realms of spiritual and the political. She has published on interpretations of Quran, Hadith, and Sufi text, Islamic feminism, gender-based violence, Sufism and Islamic law, contemporary Muslim women's embodied ethics, and marriage, sexuality, and reproductive choices amongst South African Muslim women. She is co-editor of Violence Against Women in Contemporary World Religions, Roots and Cures, author of Sufi Narratives of Intimacy, Ibn Arabi's Gender and Sexuality, and co-editor of the Women's Khutbah book, Contemporary Sermons on Spirituality and Justice from Around the World. She's involved in a number of socially engaged networks as a scholar activist, invested in ways to promote gender justice and social transformation. Jan, you have the floor. Still mute.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much, Amijan, for inviting us to this forum. Assalamu alaikum to the people that are attending. It's really joyful to be here, specifically in conversation with you, Amijan, given how central that you have been to this entire movement for the inclusivity of Muslim women in spaces of religious authority. So subhanAllah, this is just a particularly special conversation. So I'll just make some brief reflections and then hand over to Fatih. so to be thinking about this particular book, it came into being, I think, to think about it at the level of what inspired, there's a number of life events that I'll speak to shortly, but overall, the book was very much the product of a desire on my part and Fatimah's part as well, to center and to bring into a form the realities of Muslim women's experiences that were happening all over the world. So in some sense, this Hadith al-Qudsi, I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known. So I created in order to be known. And I know I don't mean this in any kind of shirky way, but this idea of all of these hidden treasures of women khatibas, women wise leaders, these and these manifestations of this wisdom, of these voices, of these realities of leadership that happens in kind of somewhat marginal spaces, but to give that both a form and a platform in the book was kind of inspired my desire to be part of this project. So there are these realities, there are these extraordinary women doing extraordinary things, and there's ordinary women doing ordinary things, all of which are important voices. So to bring those together in this collection felt like a real honor and a real barakah to be part of. I always think of it as being a bit of a midwife to this process. And so to enable this birthing of this beautiful treasure of voices it was truly a gift to me, subhanAllah, and to work with my beloved sister Fati as the co-editor and contributing to writing some of the framing of this was another barakah. So alhamdulillah, that was wonderful. I think the journey to it, the life journey to it, it's a long trajectory, and you and the kind of events that happened in 94 are pivotal to those. But let me start a little bit prior to that. One of the things that kind of has always stayed in my memory as a child is my mother used to read the Taraweeh prayers for the women in the neighborhood at the neighbor's home. We lived in a little apartment block in the middle of Durban. And all the women in Ramadan, we would do Taraweeh as a jama'ah, and the men would go over to the masjid. And there was for me both an excitement of this kind of women's space and, these beautiful scarves that people would wear, and to be as a collective during Taraweeh, but also the very clear knowledge that the masjid was the men's space and the home. And I kind of struggled with that. And then, of course, as I became a teenager and an activist, and I grew up, in the 80s in South Africa, which is a particular moment of political and social struggles and strong anti-apartheid activism, and the ways in which Muslims were involved in this struggle were central to my own formation. To be thinking about justice at the level of social justice, racial justice, and of course extending this into gender justice was part of the kind of political formation that I had in South Africa. And so the entry into the gender jihad was quite integrous to this kind of social space of thinking around justice, around inclusivity, about living in the context of radical injustice, and thinking about how we could imagine, work for, fight for, present and offer different alternatives. And then, of course, the 1994 moment was quite formative for many South Africans, in the sense that it was the first democratic elections. Many of us actually felt that it would never happen in our lifetime. So that was extraordinary, just the democratic elections in South Africa. And that was the year, subhanAllah, that, at our masjid at the Claremont Main Road Mosque, you gave this famous pre-khutbah, what came to be known as the pre-khutbah. I still refer to it as the khutbah. That you gave there. And I mean, I've reflected on this, Ami. It was both a sense in which listening to, just seeing you there on one level was extremely empowering as a young woman, to see a woman in her female embodied form giving the khutbah. And that was the one part of it. But the more profound and, for me, transformative part of it was the fact that you spoke about these various exquisitely female experiences, but you rendered that universal, and you rendered that as a learning moment for the entire ummah. And for me, that was a moment in which I thought, I have never in my life heard pregnancy and marriage and all of these kind of intimate experiences as a source of thinking theologically about what surrender means, about what being a Muslim means. And it was a deeply transformative moment for me. And that kind of was very impactful, that, and being part of the Claremont Mosque, and I think it's important for us to recognize that that 1994 kind of khutbah, as wonderful as that khutbah was, it was also a moment created by a masjid who had worked on the issues of gender justice for a period of time, with all of the complexity and the contradictions and the ambivalence in that. It was a community that had enabled that space. So being part of that space, being witness to that, watching for this first time, it felt like 94 was the moment of so many firsts, so many possibilities that were unimaginable before. A democratic South Africa, a woman in giving a khutbah, a woman giving a profoundly female-centered experience. And so for me, it was really the boundaries of imagination and possibility and justice and beauty, justice and beauty together were expanded. So subhanAllah, that was kind of some of the central kind of, formative aspects. And I had subsequently given a number of khutbahs and even led some congregations in smaller spaces, not at the Claremont Main Road Mosque, elsewhere, but I had given also khutbahs or pre-khutbahs at the Claremont Mosque. A friend of mine and a colleague who had seen me on give some of these, had suggested to me, well, why don't you consider a collection? And Fatimah and I had had a conversation before, and we had already spoken about the possibility. And she had a file. She can speak to that. But we had talked about this possibility of a book, and so then we pretty much, in conversation, we chatted about this possibility. I approached Yale University Press, and this book was the product of that. So alhamdulillah, that was the kind of journey to that. And I'm going to stop here and let Fati. Well, you can introduce her as you wish.
Oh, we will have so much more to talk about. Dr. Fatimah Seedat, PhD in Islamic law from McGill, is Associate Professor and Head of Department of African Feminist Studies at the University of Cape Town. She teaches at the intersections of gender, sexuality, law, and religion as they combine with African feminist priorities. She publishes in Islamic law, Islamic feminism, gendered legal subjectivity, decolonial pedagogy, and militarized masculinity. She is co-author and co-editor, of the Women's Khutbah book, Contemporary Sermons on Spirituality and Justice from Around the Globe, and co-editor of the African journal, Gender and Religion. Fatimah is also co-director of the Center for Contemporary Islam and acting director for the African Gender Institute, both at UCT. She is PI on the Legal Experience Project, focused on the practice of Muslim personal law in South Africa. Fatimah is a scholar activist committed to gender-based transformation in communal practices of Muslim family law and religious authority, having initiated various projects in partnership with local and international organizations. Dr. Fatimah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Amina, Professor Amina. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you, like Sadia says, about a book that comes from you, in a sense, in a way, in terms of the movement that you led a long time ago through various other happenings in the world that brought our worlds, your world, and our worlds together in some most now beautiful and productive ways. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about it specifically. In terms of the story to the book, like Sadia says, I have a story. So I do have a story. My story is probably best started with reference to a file on my computer, which is called the Women's Khutbah book. And interestingly, the date on that file is 2004. The book is published 2022. In fact, when I named that file, there was no book, but there was certainly an idea of a book. And that idea came from the fact that in 2004, I was part of there were a couple of us that were in Durban. Many of us who had previously traveled to Jordan. You might know, they often call us the Jordan girls in Durban. So the Jordan girls had gone to Jordan to study Arabic. And there we'd found a whole different experience of Islam, amongst which was the ability, the capacity, the opportunity to attend Eid Salah. And none of us had ever attended Eid Salah because it just wasn't down where we came from. So we attended Eid Salah and were totally impressed by the idea, the experience. And we went back home. My memories of it are not very clear, but everybody tells me that we went back and we created a plan for how we were then going to make sure there was Eid Salah in Durban and in Johannesburg, and that we were going to be at it. And so that plan, I don't know where that went to, but when we came back, we certainly did some of that stuff. We went out and I think the first thing we did was we attended Eid Salah. We went to find where there was Eid Salah that we could attend. We mostly found it at the Sufi mosques. So we'd attend, and when we'd attend, we'd be there. And as it happens, everybody knows the story. You're in the women's section. If sound goes, you go. If, the women's section got cleaned the moment after it was used as a madrasa in the afternoon, then you were lucky and you got to a clean women's section of the mosque, or you had sweet wrappers from the kids that were there earlier. It was that kind of a space, but still we went, and we were often the only few that were at Eid Salah in the women's section of any particular Sufi mosque that we could find space in. And then one year we went to this mosque we'd been going to regularly and found the women's section had been changed from the top of a set of very precarious stairs, which went up like that, to the ground floor, but now behind a very loud men's wudu area. So while you sat listening to your khutbah through the air and watching it on a screen, you could hear literally, you heard people gurgling and spitting and men making wudu, right? And we also had to walk past this bunch of garbage tins. But anyway, I think that was the final straw. And we decided then that we needed to have an Eid Salah forum. And so a few of us got together and did that within 2 weeks, put together an Eid Salah, which worked out quite well for us, not so much for others. And they were really upset. They called us the bikini Eidgah, or the topless Eidgah, because we were near the beach, by the way. So the topless Eidgah was near the beach. And then next year, there was a group called Taking Islam to the People. And we needed to pass this on, and they took it over, the group called Taking Islam to the People. And that's now become their project. The project of Taking Islam to the People has been, since 2004, to produce an Eidgah, an Eid Salah. And I mean, you were there, and you know some of the history of it and how we struggled to have you speak, because there was lots of resistance to your presence. And so that was the origin of the Eidgah, and also the origin of the book, in a sense, for me, in my sense of the book. Because coming out of those early days, what I knew was that we were listening to the voices of women in these Eid Salah. One of the principles of organizing the Tip Family Eidgah was that there'd always be two speakers, always a male speaker and a female speaker. So there'd always be two pre-khutbah talks, so to speak. And that was what made me, what obviously it showed me that women were doing these khutbahs, and that I felt we needed to capture them, we needed to hold them. And so as they would do it, I would ask them for the khutbahs, and I started a file, and that file became the Women's Khutbah book. Not many, from within the khutbah book, there are a couple of women who did do khutbahs at the Tip Family Eidgah. And so they're there too. So that's my sort of long-winded story of how I come to the book. And I guess the other aspect of it is for the book to be reflective of women's journeys to the book. But I'll stop there so you can ask another question, Ami.
Thank you so much for the walks down memory lane, including some of the places where I myself have walked. As you know, South Africa is just so central to my own gender jihad. So I love you guys. I need to say that before I talk about how much I love this book. Okay, so I have to say something about what's going on right now. I am simultaneously this past weekend, I reread this book, and I read a new publication on the Women's Mosque in America for a written forum that I'm going to be participating in. And, you know, I just came away with just such a buzz of hope, you know, just to see the possibilities, but also to see them in their depth and detail. So that's what I want to share with you, you know, with regard to this. I have one other story, interestingly enough, that neither one of you mentioned, and that was I decided to pay for my own ticket to come to South Africa 25 years after the 1994 event. I had been there, you know, many times, shivering in the winter, you know that. But I decided, you know, I should be there, you know, in that quarter of a century mark. I had a marvelous time, you know, as it were. But one of the highlights of that was the organization of a women's khutbah writing symposium. And I remember, you know, just being so excited, you know, about it, even after I left, trying to explain to people how groundbreaking this was, that the idea itself just would boggle the mind of somebody from the 11th, 12th, or 13th, or 14th, or 15th, or 16th, 18th, or 19th century. And yet, it was a space where there was an affirmation. I have a wall hanging, it's in my prayer and meditation room, but it says Muslim women speak. It's 35 years old. A friend of mine made it, you know, when I was in Malaysia, and I've had it, you know, ever since. And even when I travel, I bring it with me, you know, because the idea of our voices being silenced in so many ways sometimes leads us and other women to think, you know, that one, we don't have a voice, or two, that if we have a voice, our voice doesn't matter. Now, when you read this book, if you have not already, one of the most powerful things that you will take away from it is how much women's voices matter. Not just in terms of standing, you know, in the minbar of those places that are, you know, inviting enough for us, you know, to be present, but in terms of this interplay that is done so powerfully with regard to social justice. There is no way to deny the power of the social justice component in this book, and yet it is done to understand that there is an intersection between spirituality and politics, and that that intersection doesn't have to be guns and bombs and violence. It can be beauty and love and tenderness and struggle. And you will really, I mean, it's just breathtaking, you know, in this book in terms of the depth and the breadth of that kind of consideration. There's so much more that I want to say. I'm going to try to sneak it in there, you know, when I ask questions instead. I also want to just say something a little bit about the organization of the book by way of leading into the first question. When I was invited to participate, I really took to heart the fact that not only was the particular khutbah of, you know, whoever, you know, is the author of the various chapters was invited, but also just what I asked you, you know, like what led you up to this moment? What was your experience of this moment? And there's so many women here that I do know, so many of the khutbahs that, you know, maybe I had been in attendance to or read about at some other place, but I just love the way that people talk about their particular journey. So in a way, you have two books, you know, you have two volumes. What was it that caused you to not just include the khutbahs? Why did you think that, also including the biographical material was, I think, equally important? We'll start with Fatima, please, Dr. Seedat.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, in the journey to the member, now view and in the book, as you noted, is crucial to what happens at the member. I think we were very clear about that. And I think that comes from both of our own experiences and also knowing your experience, right? How you got there and what happened to you through that process. For me, that loomed very large, as did the fact that when we asked people to write, many people said, no, I can't, or I don't. And so part of the work of the book was to get people to see themselves as writers of khutbah. So that process of getting there to see themselves was also something that was as crucial to actually writing the khutbah. For people to actually see themselves as possessors of knowledge, possessors of just that they are valuable knowers, and their ways of knowing, for us to recognize that their ways of knowing have everything to do with how they see themselves, how we see ourselves as people, and whether or not we belong on this member, whether or not we have right views or wrong views, whether we've been appropriately trained or not, whether we've been, with the language or not. So a lot of it, I mean, it was almost instinctive. It was intuitive, I think, to do it in this way, where it was the person with their khutbah. It wasn't simply the act of doing a khutbah that was significant. It was what do you have to go through within yourself to do that? Because the khutbah has been made such an exclusively male authority space that even males who are not authoritative don't believe they have the right to be there or should be there. So it was crucial that the two work together. And we really enjoyed the way people reflected on their experience coming to the khutbah. I mean, the stories are beautiful, just beautiful.
Yeah, it kind of rehumanizes them in a way, because some of the khutbahs, they stand out, in what they unfold. But then if you don't know anything about the person, you don't understand that, women have taken this task of challenging the limitations that have been put on us and the restrictions. That they take it very seriously, and they take it within a trajectory of something, I think, in the depths, of their souls. Dr. Shaikh?
Yeah, I think the reality of knowledge being embodied is really also what we wanted to convey, because in fact, what much of patriarchal scholarship, or the way in which authority that we know it to be, universalizes male experience, doesn't render it visible, doesn't recognize that all of knowledge is embodied, and the capacity to bring, I suppose broadly in feminist work and in feminist epistemology, the idea of making visible the knower as an embodied human being, and that all of knowledge is constituted through experience. And I think that kind of is illustrated beautifully in terms of the essays coming there. And I think actually, Ami, as I'm reflecting very much, just thinking about your khutbah in 1994, what you brought to that was your experience. You brought into the center of the khutbah an experiential journey, and then you theologized from that. And that kind of stayed as an archetype in me, so that journey, because I reflected that it wasn't just it wasn't just the content, the theological content, but it was the way in which you rendered that meaningful in a very embodied way. And so that for me became quite formative as an archetype somewhere in my being. So thinking about knowledge in that kind of lived way, thinking about the absolute importance of bringing to the center the variety of human experiences, so that we can think about knowledge in a broadest sense. We can decolonize, or we can depatriarchalize the ways in which knowledge becomes, men's knowledge becomes rendered, elites' knowledge becomes rendered as being a kind of, the norm. So I think, so that's the story. And I think there's just such a lot of knowledge also embedded in the essays, right? So the essays themselves serve as a fountain of knowledge. And they complement each other, I think, rather well. I think that the bottom line is that we are unschooled. We are almost, at least, we are schooled in unknowing as women from the get-go, in patriarchal traditions. And so the idea of schooling ourselves in learning, schooling ourselves in understanding the process of learning is, I think, what kind of becomes apparent as you put essays and theological work together, personal essays and theological work together.
And the first part is called a tafsir of experience. The essay everyone points to now is your essay, about lived reality as experience. I think sometimes we fall into the trap of actually taking for granted that this monopoly over these sacred spaces that's been held by, cisgendered male bodies is in fact a universal, and somehow it's going to relate to everyone the same. I know for me, that was my motivation in 1994, because I didn't have a script and I didn't have anything prepared. And I thought, well, what shall I speak of? I will speak of what I know, but what it does is not simply become reduced to a personal narrative, which is not to say that that is not also essential, but simply to say that it becomes a model for how we interpret text and how we apply those interpretations to the ways in which we understand law and policy. Therefore, I always ask, can there be social justice if Muslim women don't experience that justice? With regard to, keeping that personal experience as a part of how women reflected, if not within their khutbahs, then about their own khutbahs, I think is transformative, for future generations, because, the generations after us will not have to redo this struggle. I mean, it is true that there are women's mosques and there are other places, and other opportunities for women to, act as khatibas and imams. But I think with the workshop, when I was there, and, with this publication, it's a done deal. You just can't put that genie back in the box. I was particularly moved by the women who were writing from, I would want to say, a much more beleaguered experience in the section of the book about resisting injustice. These actually were mostly comprised of authors that I did not know, except for the last two, who were Zaina Anwar and Farah Zeb. And the only reason why I mentioned their names is because, well, they gave their khutbahs in South Africa, but also they partnered for a single event. Instead of two parts to the khutbah, there were two speakers. And you also include an essay from a Malaysian Muslim woman who was part of a khutbah that she read her poetry in, and where the entire performance of that particular Jum'ah was participated in by several persons fulfilling several different roles. And I also think that this is groundbreaking, because for me, the idea of deconstructing the notions that we tend to carry about leadership as a single head that's sort of like, unquestionable. There is a question coming, I swear. But the thing that I, kind of want to get us to reflect on a little bit more here is the question of authority. And what do you think, given your own life struggles and the complications of putting together a volume that involves many, many people, literally from across the globe, what do you think about the notions of authority as they are transformed in this book? So we'll start now again with Dr. Sadia.
Thank you, Amijan. And I think I'd actually like to reflect a little bit on the workshop that we held on, that you mentioned. So part of this, thinking about authority and recalibrating authority and opening it up to different forms of different modes of being is very central to this project. And so the khutbah writing workshop, I think, was particularly exciting in that it allowed us to kind of render visible, because normally when you say, even the first time I had to give a khutbah, I went quickly online, tried to figure out, what are the Arabic parts that I need to know? What are the English parts that I need to know? How am I going to do this correctly? And so this idea of the correct manner, the mode of doing this, men are just schooled in this because, it's something that you're expected to do. And so when we come into these spaces, the question is, how much of the form is valuable for us, and that we need to, be schooled in it. And so the khutbah writing workshop was effectively to give ourselves and other people that were on the margins the capacity to say, this is accessible. This need not be the kind of preserve of an elite group of men that went to some Darul Ulum. There is a way in which the book is a member of sorts. The book, by producing a khutbah, firstly show you the diversity of perspectives, and then the wonderful part of this is that we received a khutbah from Umayma originally, Umayma Abu Bakr, which was so beautifully structured. And then together, myself and Fatima and Roshila Naya, who was our project manager on this particular book, we looked at this and we pieced together, from Umayma's khutbah, a template. And the idea for a template was simply because when people, normally resisted this idea of taking on this authority because they didn't know the form, it's to make this accessible. So we drew from another, brilliant and beautiful woman scholar who had given us this very perfected kind of khutbah, which was so beautifully structured, and we created a template based on Umayma's, and Roshila herself then worked through, certain ideas and created a template. So all of this is to render accessible things that have been seen as the kind of, the preserve of an elite group or a particular kind of institution. I think the other point beyond the technicality, so the khutbah writing workshop was a fantastic project. I mean, it was wonderful that you were here at that time and it was part of this celebratory 25 years. But what it also did is, it created the space for us to think about how learning could be done differently, how engaging our own experiences could be part of how knowledge and authority gets constituted. So one of the things, Ami, in the version of the book, there's a sad mistake. It's called a tafsir of possibility. Chapter 3 is actually not a tafsir of experience. It's a tafsir of possibility. So that, unfortunately, hopefully in the next edition, it would be reconstituted. I mean, it would be kind of correctly edited. But the tafsir of possibility builds not just on a tafsir of praxis. I mean, the category of my work that we drew on a tafsir of praxis, which I had first formulated. And then the idea of a tafsir of possibility means it's not just our experiences, but what are the possibilities for leadership? How do we take all of these variety of experiences? And the idea of expanding the notion of leadership is that more and more human experiences can be included so that leadership becomes more and more representative. And the more diverse voices, the more diversity of voices, of experiences, the more universal is the reach of knowledge that's produced by people that have very different lived experiences. So this, in some senses, moving or building upon a tafsir of praxis or a tafsir of experience that I had first theorized when I'd worked with Muslim South African women and, the ethics of them resisting violence. And the idea then is, Fatima and I built this idea of a tafsir of possibility, looking at all of these extraordinary voices, which brought very different and very, very textured experiences in. And the essay, the spoken word piece that you speak to by Sheena Baharuddin, truly every time I read that spoken word poem, the hairs on my arms stand up, my heart skips, because there's just such an exquisite connection of spirituality and justice in that piece. And so the fact that we have this poetic form, the fact that there's these different formations. You know, Fatima and I have been part of an online women's congregation where people did very different kinds, you know, so the adhan was done by one person, the children would do the salawat, there were different people leading, there were this kind of democratization, if we want to use that language, of all of these things expands our own hearts, expands our own capacity to engage. You know, part of me historically was quite a snob about recitation. I really liked recitation in a certain form. And then when I was part of congregations where there were very different melodies and lyrics, and some I really struggled to appreciate them. Some I still don't appreciate, to be fair, but some, it actually expanded my capacity to hear beauty. SubhanAllah, you know, so really at the beginning, I was under this vision that, or under the impression, or had my own aesthetics of what was beautiful recitation. Being in a community where I had to listen to very different voices and melodies and perspectives and khutbahs, created within me the capacity to expand my own appreciation. And I think this is true for all of us, our capacity to hear very different voices, both in terms of sound, but also in terms of meaning, creates the capacity to appreciate wisdom and beauty that come in very different forms. And that is a deeply humanizing, spiritualizing experience, in my view.
Yes, I like this, you know, democratization. I have a essay that came out last year after 8 years called Democratization of Authority in Islam, because I think, you know, trying to deconstruct the idea of an elite class is so important for the future, you know, of Islam. And I also, you know, feel that women are leading the way. Women and non-binaries, they're leading the way because they do put forward their experience. Every single one of the women who, you know, wrote an essay spoke about their reluctance because, you know, of the expectation that what is supposed to happen in that space is supposed to look a certain way, act a certain way, and know certain things. And returning to, you know, this idea of leadership as representation, you know, like Fatimah said, you know, there's a story, you know, if you have a story, you have something to share, and, you know, to really encourage women to be a part of that. I think that this book is going to bring so much heart to so many people because of the ways in which, you know, it's a combination of their, you know, their actual khutbahs, and then they talk about their reluctance, you know, or their, you know, nervousness with regard to, you know, filling that role. The first time, Noor Rafia, who's just one of my favorite Quranic exegetes here in Indonesia, it was at that same Musawa Jum'ah that was collective. She was the one who was the imam. She led the prayer, you know. Now, you know her, she's, you know, very strong, very powerful, very eloquent. Her essay is one of the ones I thought, I thought if I start reading from within the particular khutbahs or the essays, I would never get done, you know, but her voice was so soft at that time. And there was like a little bit of a, you know, of a shudder in her voice and everything, because it's not just, I mean, she's been praying her whole life, you know, she's Indonesian, you know, they're very, very, you know, religiously performative here, you know. It is just this whole idea, it is not just this moment, but that this moment becomes a catalyst for a future that most of us did not grow in our Islam to know about, you know. And I think that's one of the gifts that this book is going to give. I have one sort of technical kind of question that I want to ask, and then I will remind the people in the gallery that you will be able to ask questions after the set of answers that we get for this next question, which will be shorter because it really is kind of technical. You need to use that thing that under the reactions, there's like a place for you to raise your hand so I can recognize you. And when I recognize you, if you are okay with both your video and your audio, please feel free to unmute yourself and open up your camera. And if, on the other hand, you would rather just ask your question but have no video, that's fine. When I recognize you, you can just ask your question. But for those who would like even more privacy and discretion, please feel free to, put your questions or comments in the chat, and I will review them and include them along with considerations from the gallery. So this is my question. I have known about the project, since you guys, started working on it. I think I might have submitted mine in a timely manner. I'm not sure. Because I don't pretend that I'm always on time sometimes. But logistically, I mean, this is sort of two parts to this question, two things that I'm really interested in. How did you decide on the breakdown for the chapters and to include this, this vast, this rich, this deep material? How did you decide to put them? Did you have any disagreements and you had to kind of come to a compromise, number one? And number two, how easy was it for you to reach out to these various women khatibas from, all over the world? I just want to know something about what the project of trying to edit this was like. Yeah, we'll go with you, Asadi, only because your picture is the one that my computer shows me, because they don't show me myself when I'm talking, thank God. So Dr. Sadia.
So it was a challenge, of course, putting a volume like this together. But I'm not going to talk about all of the labor that goes into corralling 21 different contributors, subhanAllah. I think the question of, yes, Fatima and I had lots of, and the lovely thing about a sisterhood like ours is that we have some very passionate disagreements around a number of things. But the way in which we engage it, I think, was also such a learning curve for me. I think we tried as far as possible to get as many diverse voices. I mean, one example, to get Sheikha Omo, whose khutbah is the first one and really is an extraordinary khutbah. I had seen Sheikha Omo on a video. There's a documentary called Sheikha that's not complete. It's been in process for 10 years. I don't know why it's not complete. But I was interviewed for this project and was given the kind of video that the clip as it was in the making. And I watched this and I watched the Senegalese Sufi Sheikha, and she blew me away. And I essentially asked the directors, please, can I have her email? And I cold called her on email and said, would you write us a khutbah? And was kind of thinking, she doesn't know who I am. Why would she do this? And she did, subhanAllah. And I mean, it's a really powerful khutbah. So I think on one hand, there were particular people whose voices and the idea of getting people from different parts of the continent, from different parts of the world, the idea of making it a truly global book was part of what Fatima and I wanted to be able to do. It has a large South African representation, or a significant, shouldn't I say large because it's significant. And that was part of birthing the book within our context. And we also wanted to be true to that. So, part of that is there's a significant contingent of South African contributors. And the idea was to be able to engage Muslims in a minority and a majority context. It was more challenging to get that. We had, a number of people refuse. Also because not all women thought that this was a project that was what they wanted to be identified with, which was also fine. So I think the idea was to get many voices to enable different kinds of leaders, not just theologians and scholars, but activists and women that were, involved in all kinds of engagements in different ways and spheres, to get some level of inclusivity, to be thinking around gender and sexuality issues, to get some level of inclusivity, and of course, the problem around this is also like, who rejects you when you make an invitation? There are people that didn't want to be part of this conversation. So subhanAllah. But I think we did a fairly decent job of reaching out and getting many voices that encompass a variety of experiences. And I know that I'm missing something important, so I'm going to let Fatima come in there. I feel like I'm missing something important, Janam.
If it comes back, you can come back. Fatima.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, you're asking about breadth and then the depth. I think some of the breadth is also because we have very different interests. Sadia and I are very different in terms of the kind of work we're interested in. And so perhaps it's reflecting all of that difference. And so it gets very broad in terms of its representation. And that, I think, it's really helped us. And then there's the other part of it, which I think is also about our own dynamic. We're very different in terms of how we work. So there's the kind of, I would always say that it was when we write together, it's fascinating because Sadia makes little pearls, and each little sentence is a beautiful pearl that goes down. And the pearl has to be made and as it goes. And here's Fatima going, can you do something other than make pearls? Do what Fatima does, which is throw up on the page and then I clean it up. So it is between the throw up and the pearl that somehow all of this came through. So I mean, in terms of doing collective work, working in a relationship of a co-editorship or a co-authorship, it was very instructive. There was lots to learn and a lot I think we've taken from it. We still work together a lot, but we've learned a lot. I know for me, it's taught me a lot about how I work, how I write, how I work with people, how I read. And it's something I think that is very instructive, for others who want to work together, that even working with somebody whose ideas are different, but if you share a commonality of connection, some rich work can come out. I think, yeah, it was fun.
You've done an amazing job, friends. Maybe it was tongue in cheek. I asked about whether or not you encountered any difficulty because you can't see it when you look at the volume. Everything. Yes.
No, on that score, it was a story, and a great deal of gratitude and debt to our project manager, who did a lot of that work of going back and forth to people, getting things and getting it back, and a lot of editing as well. A book like this doesn't have this kind of thread and resonance and consonance throughout of the book without some beautiful editorship, and our project manager really worked a lot to help us with that, and spent lots of time doing that editing so that we have a sense of evenness through the book. Even though there's 21 different people writing, you can still feel a sense of evenness. So that takes a lot of work. So a lot of debt and gratitude to her as well.
I am also grateful to her. Now I want to just for a second, I'm going to look at my gallery to see if we have any hands up. Do we have any hands up? So it's okay because I have more that I'd like to discuss. So you can change your mind and raise your hand later. Don't forget, you don't have to use your video or your audio. You can put it in the chat as well. And let me go back to speaker just because the recording will determine things based on the settings that I have. So I do want to ask a little bit about
Amijan, Sophia has her hand up, I see.
Yes, let me just go back. Yes, Dr. Rahman, please unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I put my hand up a little later than when you were looking at the gallery, so that's entirely my fault. But thank you, Professor Sheikh, for picking that up, and to Professor Amina and Professor Fatima. Thank you so much. What an incredible way to spend my afternoon in the company of your three incredible minds and hearts. So some of you may know I run this Islam and Gender Read Along online, and we are currently in the throes of reading this beautiful book of yours, the Women's Khutbah book. We are just a few khutbahs in, and every week it is almost miraculous how each khutbah speaks so clearly to an issue that has been thrown up in our worlds in the here and now. So last week we read Resisting the Satanic Principle and Recovering Maslaha by Rabia Mullah. And, it coincided with many of us reading this really awful, heartbreaking public statement that had come out of North America. And the juxtaposition of the two side by side for many of us was a reminder of, actually you're doing something so powerful in the sense that it's not just about taking, reclaiming the minbar, but it's also metaphorical almost, like, so the mimbar stands at the head of the masjid. It's the central focal point of the community's attention. And I feel like you are bringing our attention back as believers to the very precepts, the very basis, the pillars of Islam: mercy, justice, compassion, equality. And so, you know, I just want to thank you actually for that service, because it is so profound. And I'd like actually to also get your thoughts on that, you know, on how the khutbahs are. Yeah, I want to use the word miraculous. I think they are constantly speaking to issues that are throwing themselves up in the here and now for us. I mean, on my very first session, you know, I had, you know, we've got people from all sorts of backgrounds that join us. And one individual had said that, you know, she was, she didn't use the word cynical, and I don't believe she was cynical, but I think a little apprehensive, because the idea of women as khatibas or women as imams has been so, you know, turned into such a scandalous controversy for the community. And she was like, you know, my husband was asking me as well, like, well, what is a women's khutbah about? And I think so far every single khutbah has demonstrated so beautifully that actually our concerns, Muslim women's concerns around the world, is about cohesion and about, you know, breaking down these patriarchal and essentially satanic borders that have been put up by men and you know, others along the way, and saying no to them and pulling them down. And actually, we were also planning on getting the women folk and the non-binary folk who joined this read along to write their own khutbahs at the end of this, because we want to, you know, put it into practice, so that we're not just reading this book, but that we're actually putting it into practice. And the hope is that everybody will record themselves and we'll be able to put it out on, you know, to the group every Friday, so that we have an alternative Jummah khutbah to listen to as well, because not all of us have the privilege of being near a you know, progressive masjid or an inclusive masjid. So I wanted to put all of that to you. But yeah, I'd like to hear about, you know, how you know, the juxtaposition of these wonderful and beautiful and egalitarian and resistant khutbahs with the world and where we are as a global community in so many ways still, and how you maintain your positivity. You know, how, you know, this is the thing that also comes up weekly, that this is so profound and this is so beautiful, and yet. And it's the and yet that I feel that we almost always land on. And obviously all three of you have this, you know, incredible journey that you've already gone on before us, and for so many of us to learn from, and are still learning from, and no doubt will continue to learn from. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit of wisdom and insight into that as well.
Ladies.
So, you know, for me, I want to come back to, I want to connect, Sophia, and thank you for your lovely, thank you for telling us what's happening with the book. It's so nice to know that it's being read and it's making an impact and it's doing things in the world, because that's what you want, right? So thank you for sharing that. But I want to connect this with Amina's earlier question. I mean, you asked about authority, right? What do we do with this? And what does this mean for authority? So I think Sophia is showing exactly one of the things that can happen with this book, is people begin to see themselves in that place of authority. And then the next question is, what happens when we get into places of authority that were previously denied to us? What do we do with that authority? Do we keep doing the things that were done with that authority, or are we in a place to revision it, reshape it, and then use it in different ways, so that we don't just become new people doing old things in, you know, or repeating the patterns of oppression that we've been subject to? And so part of the book was to offer people everything you need to do to write a khutbah. And that's why you've got the two templates at the back. So you get everything you need to do to write a khutbah. But the part of it where you actually take the authority to stand in front of a congregation and say, here is my experience, and I'm sharing it with you for a reason. that's a part you come to on your own, right? That's a part you bring yourself to that place. And the kind of interrogation that we have to do there is really important. And I say this because I don't like mosques. I really don't like mosque spaces that I've been to. And I often tell people, tongue in cheek, but completely meaningfully, mosques are bad for my iman, right? I go into a mosque and I'm challenged, my iman is challenged, and my sense of self is challenged, and my relationship with my creator is challenged, because everything about most mosques I go to does not affirm me or anything I want to believe is divine. So there is this challenge of now putting up, here's a woman's khutbah book, so women can do khutbah. What are we going to do with the khutbahs that we do? Are we going to keep doing the things that were done to us with khutbahs, which is to pound you down and let you know how awful you are, or how you have to live up to some standards that's almost impossible to live up to? Or we're going to do something different with it. So it's not just about coming into authority, but how we're going to reshape that authority. What are we going to do with it? How uncomfortable are we going to be with our own place in that authority? And what are we going to do with that discomfort, so that we don't become those authoritarians that we don't like, and that, the book is completely not about. Yeah.
I'd like to just add to that a little bit. Sophia Jan, thank you for being here. And actually, I have to just echo what Fatimah says. It's absolutely delightful to know that people are reading it and finding it meaningful. SubhanAllah, I think that's the barakah of the beautiful spirits that have all contributed, really the barakah of all of them. So SubhanAllah, it's just wonderful to hear that. This idea of maintaining hope and positivity and optimism in times that are so trying, because it doesn't matter which part of the world we are, we're constantly assaulted by all of the challenges of being human in a world that's unjust, despite all of our, struggles. And I think one of the things that is helpful, and I'm really excited about the last chapter, not the last chapter, chapter 3, where we're conceptualizing a tafsir of possibility. Because what we do is we actually reflect, in this kind of fairly brief, but I think substantial chapter, on really using or reflecting. Fatima and I actually have reflected on this khutbahs as sources of Islamic feminist theology. And we kind of bring it full circle back to the Quranic archetypes. And, we introduce Khawla and Maryam alayhi salatu wassalam, and Hajar alayhi salatu wassalam as Quranic archetypes. And they're not just archetypes of, so we theorize drawing on the works of, Amina's work on Hajar, on Mahja Kaab's exquisite work on Khawla, on Kisha's work on Maryam alayhi salatu wassalam. So we bring that together, and in some sense, we kind of configuring and consolidating some of those powerful insights. But what we're actually doing is we're also retrieving from our tradition really cool troublemaking women. Women were troublemakers. Khawla was a troublemaker. Maryam was a troublemaker. Hajar was sassy, was powerful. So the ways in which women contested injustice is not something new. The struggle against injustice is not something new. We have within our tradition this powerful lineage. And part of these khutbahs and part of our reflection on the khutbah is to say that we actually, we drawing and living in this genealogy of very strong, powerful Muslim women. And yes, we are going to be articulating realities and contexts and challenges that they did not envisage because it was not on their horizon. And these are the things on our horizon. But we have this relationship with a trajectory and an ancestry of women who were sassy troublemakers, gender benders. Maryam alayhi salatu wassalam was this figure that Kisha Ali really says queers our understanding of gender and of motherhood in really powerful ways. We have Khawla, who says to the Prophet salatu wassalam, yes, you're telling me that I need to put up with custom, but actually, no, I don't accept that. She says to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I do not accept your judgment on this. Please, can you go back to God? And she's not just wrestling with the Prophet, but she's wrestling with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and the Prophet takes us seriously, and God responds. So what does that say to us? That says to us that the authority and the capacity to be engaged from your experience, when you experience injustice, to tussle, struggle, to resist, to stand up, to question, is something that is part of our genealogy as Muslim women. And it's something that we should be enacting and must be enacting, and that there can be beautiful fruit that come from that. And I mean, ultimately, the challenge of faith, is it not, is to stay with hope and to stay with, despite all of the world, and yet we are constantly in the and yet. And the struggle is for each of us, even if the and yet is at a very personal level, whether it's, personal, social, political. As human beings, we journey through all of these challenges all the time. And what does it mean for each of us to journey and hold on to the part of us that is constantly in calibration with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Sometimes we each feel so distant. We know it's there and we can't connect to it. But the question of being a believer is how you struggle to keep that, to feed that, to nurture that. And so inshallah, this book is one form of nurturance. But we all struggle, we all struggle, and we all go between these experiences of doubt and forlornness and, complete sense of being overwhelmed. And yet to be a believer is to constantly reach out and stay with hope despite all else. So, and I'm not saying that's easy, that's sometimes a real challenge. But Bismillah, it is part of, I think, being Muslim.
Yes. Fatima, you have something to add?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, so we are sufficiently past the hour, but I wanted to just ask both of you about your recent project at UCT to create a master's in the study of sexualities in Islam. Congratulations. I am so thrilled that all of the administrative work that goes into those things have been completed. To my knowledge, yours will still be the first master's. And yet my push for this, reinvestment into the studies of sexuality as part of Islamic studies is based on the reinvestment, because we did have a very rich, a very diverse, a very inclusive kind of study of sexualities, and it was not simply in the binary, and it was not simply to say everyone who differs from the hetero dominant model is a deviant or a sinner. And therefore your completion of the start of a program is just so delightful to me, because I hope there will be many, many more. Can you tell me a little bit about that process and where you are in it? And this is actually going to be our final question for the evening, or my evening, your morning.
Sure. So yeah, it's in the first year, we've got our first cohort already, a cohort of 5 wonderful students, local and international. And the first year of the project is the first year of the degree. Students take a research module and 2 core substantive modules. And in the second year, and by the end of the first year, we try to get the proposal finished, plus students have had courses, and in the second year, we do dissertation. So it's a lovely degree that sits between the Department for the Study of Religion and the Department for African Feminist Studies, which is where Sadia and I both sit. And the courses are courses which function in both our departments, and so you get a bit of both. And really what we're trying to do is give students a way or a place where they can find what neither Sadia nor I found when we were studying, and probably you too, Ami. We had to go out and find all these little bits and pieces of information in different departments, and suddenly we were working in 3 departments or 2 departments, and the idea is to be able to have it all in one space. incredibly valuable, we think, for students. And with the work that some of the students are doing right now, it's really, really looking, you can see some of the fruit of it already. It's a 2-year degree, and residential for the first year at least is residential. The second year we will be doing in modules. But I don't know if this is a good or bad place to speak about it, but the fact is, I mean, you're probably going through the same thing. To try to find funding for projects like this is not easy. There are very, very few people who are interested in funding this work. So right now we have scholarships for the students that are in the program, some of them, but that's our next challenge, to find the kind of funding that can actually allow us to build up the rest of the body that needs to go around the master's degree, because you need, you know, a strong intellectual environment, and we want to still create that, try to do a lot more of it. We want to invite people, we want to have, you know, retreats where students can write, we want to, you know, just create a bigger conversation and more interest and more buzz around it. And for that, we're still looking for support for that. But it really is exciting to be doing this. We've been grading essays, and some of the things that the students write, so beautiful, inspiring, and, you know, confirms that it's the right thing. It's a needed thing. It's a very much needed thing. Yeah.
If I can just add something to that, and I think, Fatimah, this is the perfect place to say it, because it is about how politics enables or economics enables certain capacities. I mean, our real struggle to sustain this program and to keep it going is for those who think that it's valuable to be thinking about sexuality and gender justice as something that is part of building a different vision of Islam. And unfortunately, we've been the possibility for this to really grow, or even just to be sustained, is contingent on us getting funds. And that's been a lot more challenging than we thought it would be. So I think the idea also is, how do we really tap into those who would see this? You know, people think of giving their zakah rightly, you know, to people that for feeding schemes, for the kind of immediate needs of a community. But often the idea of giving to a longer term project, also you need to buy into that vision of a project. So to be able to get that support, something that will enable this to continue, I think it's a very unique location. I think our capacity to really make this into a vibrant intellectual center where we can draw in and bring in, you know, guests like yourself and other people, is all contingent on the fact that we actually need funding. So that's really the trajectory that is requiring a lot more energy than we had anticipated. But inshallah, I'm hoping that, you know, perhaps somebody listens to this who has money that they want to be thinking about a project where they really feel that this vision of Islam is one that they want to support. Because for this to really flourish, it needs, and we have had, except for 3 scholarships, have had actually no funding. So we're both doing this in addition to all of our other responsibilities at the university, which makes it challenging. And so these are the politics of it functioning at a practical level is also part of how we think about, we need to be thinking about constructive ways to enable these projects in the various spaces that we work in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was somewhat waylaid in my efforts to work alongside both the National Islamic University here and Stark King School for the Ministry in the US to, you know, try to create a certificate or a degree program or something because of the pandemic. But then, you know, I said, I'm just not going to wait. So actually, I started on my own funds. To, you know, as they say, put your money where your mouth is, you know, and then I just have to learn to pace myself and stop pretending that everything can happen under this, you know, independent platform, as much as I might want. Instead, you know, I'll frustrate myself trying to do too much. So, you know, you are definitely in my dua for, you know, someone seeing the importance of, you know, such a project. To the extent that, you know, its transformation can happen in full. I think with regard to the context of the, you know, homophobic message that came out recently, it's really a clear indication of how limited is our knowledge collectively with regard to how significant the studies of sexuality, had always been in Islam, because, you couldn't come away with some of the things, that's been said there and still sort of, hold your mustard. But in the absence of other places where there is support, then it kind of gives free rein to more ignorance being perpetuated as if it is the only way, to think about Islam. So you are definitely not only in my prayers, but, right away I'm trying to think, I'm like the worst fundraiser type person, on the planet. So right away I'm just trying to think, oh, there got to be somebody, but inshallah, that will happen because I do believe that knowledge is power. And one of the ways that this book, I think, steps so clearly into its position as an authoritative text is that it does demonstrate the knowledge of a diversity of women for whom their relationship to Islam is a matter of great love and concern and challenge. And yet they take up that challenge because of the love and concern. And I am very grateful to you for putting it together. I mean, I was just buzzing with happiness rereading this one and reading Women's Mosque in America over the weekend. So, Dr. Rahman, when you ask, like, how do we keep hope alive? You have to just keep reading these kinds of things. And that is what I hope, those of you who have not seen it will take an opportunity to do. It is not the sort of stuffy kind of academic, that we can all write, because you can't get a PhD without it in this world, but rather it is women who articulate from the pool of their wisdom and from the depths of their life experiences. And I think it will transform you and help us all with the struggle for justice. Thank you so much for joining me here on Friends Along the Way. Thank you all in the gallery. I'm so pleased to see we had a nice turnout for the first time for me in several months. But at the same time, more importantly, I think the topic itself warrants, your attendance, and I'm very happy about that. So, assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Amit. Assalamu alaikum.